The smell is the first thing that gets you. Not the smoke. Everyone expects the smoke. It's the smell of a life burning. A unique, sickeningly sweet cocktail of melting plastic, scorched wood, vaporized memories, and something deeply organic that you try not to put a name to. For 10 years, that smell has been the start of my workday. You learn to live with it. You learn to function in it. You learn to wash it out of your hair and your clothes, but you never quite get it out of your head. My name is Jack, and my world is measured in the minutes between the alarm bell and the moment the water hits the flames. It's a world of routine. Check the gear, clean the truck, train, eat, wait. The waiting is the hardest part. It's a heavy, coiled silence, thick with the things we don't say, the calls we remember, the faces we can't forget. Before the incident, my life had settled into this rhythm. A good rhythm, a purposeful one, but a rhythm nonetheless. There was a certain numbness to it. You see enough tragedy, enough loss, and you have to build a wall. Mine was made of procedure, black humor, and the quiet satisfaction of a job done. I was good at it. I was calm under pressure. I could read a building, predict a flashover, and carry a child through a blind hallway like I was carrying groceries. But the man who did that was a different man than the one who went home, who struggled to connect with his own family, who felt a million miles away at birthday parties and holidays. My sister, Chloe, was getting married. That was the big thing on the horizon. For everyone else, it was about flowers and caterers. For me, it was about getting enough shifts covered to be there for the whole weekend. Chloe and I were different. She lived in a world of spreadsheets and quarterly reports, a world where problems could be solved with a well-worded email. My world was visceral, loud, and unforgiving. We loved each other, but we didn't always understand each other. I think a part of me was tired, not just physically but spiritually, tired of the wall, tired of the numbness. I was living a life of immense purpose that somehow felt hollow. Like I was a tool performing a function, a very important function, but a tool nonetheless. I didn't know how much I needed that to change until the night of the call. Came in at 3:14 a.m. A single-family dwelling. Reported flames visible, possible entrapment. The words sent a familiar jolt of ice and fire through my veins. The numbness vanished, replaced by a razor-sharp focus. Pulling on my turnout gear was an act of transformation. The heavy coat, the boots, the helmet, it was armor not just against the fire, but against the fear. When we arrived, the scene was chaos. The bottom floor of a 2-story house was a roaring furnace. Flames were licking out of the windows, painting the night sky in hellish orange and black. A woman was on the lawn, screaming, "My babies! My kids are up there!" Her voice was a raw, primal sound that cut through the noise of the sirens and the crackling fire. Protocol takes over. I was on the search and rescue team. My partner, Dave, and I went in. The heat was a physical blow, a solid wall of force that you had to push through. The smoke was a thick, black monster, swallowing the light from our headlamps, reducing the world to what you could feel with your hands and what you could hear over the roar and your own ragged breathing. We went low, crawling under the worst of the heat. The layout was a mess of fallen debris and furniture. Every second felt like an hour. We swept the first upstairs bedroom. Empty. The second. Empty. The pressure in my chest was immense. The third bedroom door was hot to the touch. I cracked it open. A blast of superheated gas blew past my helmet. Inside, huddled in a corner, were 3 small shapes. 3 children, a boy and 2 younger girls, coughing, terrified, but conscious. Getting them out was a blur of controlled, desperate action. I took the 2 smallest, one under each arm, their small bodies feeling impossibly fragile. Dave took the boy. We moved back through the labyrinth of heat and smoke, a journey that felt infinitely longer than the one in. I remember the feeling of the cool night air hitting my face as I broke through the front door. I remember handing the children off to the paramedics, their soot-stained faces looking up at me with wide, confused eyes. I remember the mother's cry, a sound that was no longer just terror, but a gut-wrenching, soul-shattering wave of relief. And then it was over. We put out the fire. We saved the house from being a total loss. We went back to the station, smelling of smoke and victory. We had done our job. It was a good night, a great night even. In my world, it didn't get better than that. I had walked through fire and brought 3 lives back with me. The wall was intact. The numbness was gone, replaced by the clean, sharp hum of adrenaline and accomplishment. I felt, for the first time in a long time, truly alive. I had no idea that the real fire, the one that would test me in a way no blaze ever could, was still waiting to be lit. The wedding was 2 weeks later. It was a beautiful, sun-drenched affair at a vineyard, the kind of place where everything is tastefully rustic and costs a fortune. I felt like a stranger in a foreign land. My suit felt stiff and confining, a costume I wasn't used to wearing. The conversations around me were about market shares and vacationing in Bali. I nodded and smiled, but my mind kept drifting back to the acrid smell of smoke and the weight of a child in my arms. During the reception, my new brother-in-law, a nice enough guy who sold financial software, stood up to give a toast. He raised his glass to Chloe, and then he turned to me. And a special toast to Jack, Chloe's brother, the hero. We all heard what you did a couple weeks ago. Truly amazing stuff. To Jack, the fireman. A smattering of applause went through the room. I felt a hot flush of embarrassment. I hated being called a hero. The word felt hollow, like it belonged in a movie, not in the gritty reality of my life. I just wanted to do my job and be left alone. A little later, I found Chloe by the ridiculously large cake. She'd had a few glasses of champagne and was buzzing with the frantic energy of a bride on her big day. That was a nice toast, I said. She laughed, a little too loudly. Oh, Mark loves all that hero stuff. It's so dramatic. She straightened my tie. You're a good man, Jack. I'm proud of you. But sometimes, I don't know. She looked around the polished, happy room, then back at me, and the words tumbled out, careless and sharp. I mean, it's great what you do, saving people and all. But at the end of the day, you're just a fireman. She said it with a shrug, a dismissive little wave of her hand, as if explaining a simple, obvious truth. Just a fireman. The words hit me with the force of a backdraft. All the air went out of the room. The music, the laughter, the clinking of glasses. It all faded into a dull roar. In that one moment, she had taken the most meaningful event of my professional life, the thing that had made me feel alive again, and reduced it to a job title. A simple, blue-collar label. She hadn't seen the terror in the mother's eyes, or the trust in the children's. She hadn't felt the heat or breathed the poison. To her, in her perfect, well-ordered world, I was the guy who cleaned up messes. Necessary, perhaps, but ultimately simple. Just a fireman. I mumbled something, an excuse about needing some air, and walked away. I spent the rest of the wedding on autopilot, a smiling ghost in a rented suit. The hurt was a cold, heavy knot in my stomach. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was a profound sense of disillusionment. The wall I had built so carefully over the years didn't just crack. It shattered, and I was left exposed, raw, and deeply, deeply wounded. The weeks that followed were the worst of my career. Her words were a virus that infected everything. Every time the alarm bell rang, I heard her voice, just a fireman. When I pulled on my gear, I felt like I was putting on a costume, just as she saw it. The purpose I had briefly rediscovered felt like a delusion. The satisfaction was gone, replaced by a cynical, gnawing resentment. My performance on the job didn't suffer. My training was too ingrained for that. But the man inside the uniform was failing. I was short-tempered with the crew. I was distant at home. The job, which had once been my anchor, now felt like a lead weight pulling me under. I tried to fight it the only way I knew how, by being tougher, by working harder, by burying the feeling under a mountain of exhaustion. But it was no use. The wound wasn't physical. It was in my soul. I couldn't put it out with water or muscle through it. One afternoon, our captain called me into his office. He said the station had received a letter from the family I had rescued. He handed me the envelope. Inside was a card, and tucked into the card was a photograph. It was of the 3 kids, smiling, healthy, standing on their front lawn. On the back of the card, the mother had written a simple note. There are no words. We would be grateful if you would let us thank you in person. Here is my number. I stared at the picture for a long time. Their faces. They weren't victims anymore. They were just kids. I should have felt pride, but all I felt was the echo of my sister's voice. I almost threw the card away. What was the point? To get another pat on the back? To be called a hero again by people who couldn't possibly understand? But something stopped me. Maybe it was the look in the little girl's eyes in the photo. I pocketed the card. A week later, after a particularly grueling shift where we lost a house completely, I found myself sitting in my truck in the station parking lot, the card in my hand. I felt empty. I felt like a fraud. On a desperate impulse, I pulled out my phone and dialed the number. A woman answered, her voice warm and a little hesitant. It was her, Maria. I introduced myself, my voice sounding rough and unfamiliar. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line, followed by a silence so profound I thought she might have hung up. Then she spoke, and her voice was thick with emotion. "Oh my God, I can't believe you called. We made a plan to meet for coffee the next day. I almost canceled a dozen times. I felt like an imposter, but I went." I found her at a small table in the back of a quiet cafe. She looked different in the daylight, without the terror etched onto her face. She looked normal. She looked like any other mom. She stood up when she saw me, and her eyes filled with tears. She didn't offer to shake my hand. She hugged me, a real, desperate, grateful hug that lasted for a long time. We sat down, and for a few minutes we just stumbled through awkward pleasantries. Then, she looked me straight in the eye. "I don't know what you say to the person who saved your entire world," she began, her voice trembling. "Thank you feels so small. Feels insulting." I started to say something, the usual stuff about just doing my job, but she held up a hand. "Please, let me." The night of the fire, when I was on that lawn, I wasn't just watching my house burn. I was watching my life end. Everything I am, everything I live for, was in that house. My past, my future, my heart. And I knew, they were gone. She paused, taking a shaky breath. "And then you came out of that door. You came out of that hell. And you were carrying my future. You didn't just save 3 children, Jack. You saved me. You saved my husband. You saved the grandparents and the aunts and the uncles. You saved generations of people who haven't even been born yet." I sat there, stunned into silence. No one had ever spoken about my job like that. It wasn't about being a hero or being brave. It was about saving a world. Her world. "My son," she continued, a small smile appearing on her face. "He draws pictures of you. He calls you the Fire Knight. He doesn't see a uniform. He sees a knight who fought a dragon for him." She reached into her purse and pulled out a child's drawing. It was a crayon stick figure of a man in a lumpy yellow suit, holding the hands of 3 smaller stick figures, walking away from a big red and orange scribble. Underneath, in a child's shaky letters, it said, "Jack the Fur Knight." My throat felt tight. The cold knot in my stomach, the one that had been sitting there since the wedding, began to dissolve. It was being replaced by a warmth that spread through my entire body. We talked for over an hour. She told me about her kids, their names, their favorite toys, the silly things they said. And in her words, I wasn't an abstract hero or a city employee. I was a real person who had intersected with her life at its most critical moment and changed its course forever. I wasn't just a fireman. I was the man who had given her back her mornings, her bedtime stories, her everything. When I left that coffee shop, the world looked different. The sky seemed brighter. The weight on my shoulders was gone. I finally understood. My sister's world was small. It was defined by titles and salaries and perceptions. She threw a label at me because it was the only tool she had to understand what I did. But Maria had given me the truth. My value wasn't in my title. It was in the lives I touched. It was in the futures I preserved. It was in the crayon drawings on a family's refrigerator. That evening I called my sister. There was no anger in my voice, only a quiet calm. The conversation with Chloe wasn't what I expected. I didn't lead with accusations or hurt feelings. I didn't even mention what she'd said at the wedding. Instead, I started by telling her about my coffee with Maria. I told her about the hug, about the kids, about the drawing. I didn't tell the story to make her feel guilty. I told it to make her understand. I described the feeling of being on that lawn, the sound of a mother's screams, and the profound, humbling reality of what we face on a bad day. I was opening a window into my world, not to show her the flames and the danger, but to show her the humanity at its core. There was a long silence on her end of the line. When she finally spoke, her voice was small, choked with tears. "Oh, Jack, I'm so sorry." She began to cry, real, racking sobs. She told me how stressed she had been on her wedding day, how everything had felt like a performance. She confessed that a part of her had always been a little jealous of the clear, undeniable importance of my job. While she was moving numbers around on a screen, I was saving lives. Her comment hadn't come from a place of malice, but from a deep, hidden insecurity. It was a clumsy, hurtful attempt to shrink my world down to a size she could understand, to put it in a box next to her own. It was a stupid, awful thing to say. She wept. "You're not just anything. You're my brother, and you do something extraordinary." In that moment, the last of the anger washed away, replaced by a wave of empathy for my own sister. We were just two people who lived in different worlds, trying our best to find our way. We ended the call not with a strained truce, but with a genuine reconnection. The chasm between us had closed. We weren't just siblings anymore. We were friends who finally understood each other. A few days later, I was back at the station, late at night, running a maintenance check on the breathing apparatus. The familiar scent of diesel and cleaning solution hung in the air. The station was quiet, the heavy silence of waiting. But it felt different now. It wasn't a heavy, anxious silence anymore. It was peaceful. I looked around the bay at the massive red engine, at the neatly coiled hoses, at the rows of helmets and heavy coats hanging on the wall. For years, I had seen them as the tools of a trade, the components of a difficult job. Now I saw them for what they really were. They were instruments of hope. Each piece of equipment was a promise made to a stranger in their worst possible moment. The helmet wasn't just for protection. It was a beacon in the smoke. The axe wasn't for destruction. It was for creating a path to safety. My uniform wasn't a costume. It was a symbol that help had arrived, that no one was alone in the dark. The fire I had fought inside myself had been put out, not with water, but with connection. Maria's gratitude had been the spark, and Chloe's apology had been the soothing balm that allowed the healing to begin. The experience hadn't just fixed what was broken. It had rebuilt me into something stronger. I had spent a decade building a wall to keep the trauma of the job out, but I now realized that wall had also been keeping the humanity out. The pain, the fear, the desperation of the people we help. It's not something to be blocked out. It's the very thing that gives the job its sacred, profound meaning. You have to let it in. You have to let it break your heart a little, because that's what reminds you that you're fighting for more than just a building. You're fighting for a home. You're fighting for a world. I finished my checks and hung my helmet back on its peg. I ran my hand over its smooth, scarred surface. It no longer felt like a simple piece of equipment. It felt like a privilege. The weight of it was no longer a burden. It was a responsibility I was grateful to carry. My life is still one of routine, of waiting for the bell to ring, but the numbness is gone for good. In its place is a quiet, steady sense of purpose, one that isn't defined by parades or toasts, but by the silent, powerful knowledge of the worlds held within every home. I am a fireman, and in the quiet moments between the chaos, I am filled with a peace that comes from knowing that sometimes, if you're very lucky, you get to be the knight who fights the dragon.